My idea is to talk to you a little bit about how it is to work as a professional musician in the field today, because it's changed so much during the last years. Could we just start from the beginning? How did you get into the business in the first place?
Well, as you say, everything's changed so much. So this is kind of like ancient history.
Yeah.
But I literally just got into it um, by simply, I mean, I didn't plan on anything. I started playing drums at 11 years old. And by the
Yeah.
time I was 14, through friends, I had made contacts with other kids that were a little bit older than me who were already playing in clubs
Hmm.
and were looking for a drummer. And at that time, it wasn't even, it was kind of like the post-punk era in New York City. So you didn't even really have to be able to play that good or
Hmm.
hardly at all, really, to get a gig any somewhere. It could be some weird little hole in the wall in the East Village, and you might not go on till 3 in the morning, but that's how I
Wow.
started.
What
And
year was this? What year was this?
that would have been about 79.
Yeah.
And from there, you just met other musicians, other guys who happened to be at your show and said, "Oh, I'm doing a band too." Um, in particular, it was a man named Hayward Earl Peel, rest in
Hmm.
peace, bass player, because we had no bass player. It was just me, a saxophone player named Shannon Dawson, who was actually a kind of partner with Jean-Michel Basquiat,
Uh-huh.
and
Wow.
a guitar player named Tim. I'm blanking on his last name at the moment,
Mm.
but we had no bass player, and Hayward saw us and said, "You guys need a bass player," and he kind of just joined our band on his own. And then he had a side project that I did with him, and another person heard a recording of that, a guy by the name of Tomas Donker,
Hmm.
and he was looking for a rhythm section because he had just left his band, or a band that he was in called J. Walter Negro and the Loose Joints, another band that was, Jean-Michel was a fan of, actually. And so you're just making these little connections with people. And
Yeah.
before long, I'm playing in, better clubs, more clubs, doing more gigs, getting better on the instrument. And, you know, people recommend you for this, they recommend you for that. Eventually it ends up being some, artist on a major label. In this case, a guy named Grayson Hugh, who was on RCA Records. And I did a tour with him of the States. And then finally, I came to the attention of a bass player named Sarah Lee, who had just recorded with the B-52s.
Hmm.
And this is in 89. And she asks if I want to join that band because their
Mm.
drummer is too busy to go on the road. And so I do, and that blows up. And so all of a
Yeah.
sudden, here I am just doing, music for fun. And 10 years later, I end up in a band that's got, one of the most played videos on MTV, and we're touring the world. And, suddenly my life's changed.
Yeah, yeah, I can understand that. But when you started playing in the clubs in the 79 and onwards, did you work with something else as well, or did you survive on being a musician that early?
I was still in junior high school.
Okay,
So
okay,
I went through high school basically
yeah,
playing in the clubs all the time. So I didn't do very well at school. You can probably imagine. I did manage to graduate though. And then I went to
yeah.
college, and all the while just continuing doing music because I had a passion for it. I,
Mm.
I don't remember ever making up my mind that this is what I want to do for a living. It was just something that I'd fallen into, something that I loved, and something that kind of consumed me. And so by the time I got to the B-52s, uh, the summer before then, I had had my first trips to Europe with two different artists who were pretty known on the New York scene, a guy by the name of Melvin Gibbs from a band called Defunct. And he took me to Europe. Yeah, Europeans know Defunct.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and then the next summer I went with the guitar player from Defunct, Kelvin Bell, and his band Kelvinator, and toured Germany, Austria, Holland, and France. And so I was getting experience there. And at that time, I was working as a busboy in New York City at a place called the Broome Street Bar in Soho.
Wow. Okay. Wow. But how does it work when you start to play on these levels? I mean, international tours. Do you have an agent negotiating your salary, or how does it work?
No, I've never had an agent or a manager. These gigs I'm talking about that I started doing, they're literally just word of mouth things. They're like I said, there was no plan. It was just happening because New York at that time in the 80s was just full of opportunities. There were so many more clubs you could play. Didn't cost anything to go out. So people were always in the clubs, you know, Danceteria, the Peppermint Lounge, CBGB's, all these clubs. It was just a scene. So occasionally people from the industry would come to look for people. You know, that's how bands like Living Colour get discovered. But otherwise, everything is just word of mouth. And it just depends on, you know, if you're the kind of musician somebody wants, if you're the kind of person somebody likes to have in their band, if you've got, you know, some kind of thing that makes you makes people interested in you. And I never really had trouble finding people to play with. I was always in 4 or 5 bands at the same time. And you know, having to tell people I'm too busy, you know.
Interesting. When you started out, you around 79, and Basquiat you mentioned, were you sort of around the people around Andy Warhol and those people as well?
No, I never went to the factory, never met Andy or any of those people. But as I say, friends that were close friends of mine were close friends of Jean's, and he actually financed a band that Pablo Calogero was the leader of. And so I was in a band that Jean was financing called, first was called Future Primitive. And we played at, you know, his art openings. We played, you know, that band got a manager, and I got to put air quotes on that because, you know, at this level, you have lots of people who say they're managers.
Yeah.
And they're really just, you know, guys also trying to break into the industry. So they're sniffing around looking for something that can, you know, they can use. Al Diaz knew Jean, Robert Aaron knew Jean. So, you know, and as I say, Pablo and Shannon. So, you know, I mean, Jean knew me, I knew him. It wasn't like we were friends. You know, I mean, I've been to dinner with him, been to his house, things like that, in the studio, but that was sort of aside from Andy Warhol in that scene. It wasn't part of that scene. We were our own little scene.
Oh, I see. And how was it for you? We're going to talk more about your background, but I just want to ask you, what was it like for you when the pandemic broke out? Because you couldn't do any tours or anything. I mean, did it change your situation a lot?
Yeah.
Or did you work in the studio instead in that time?
Even the studio was very precarious at first. I didn't do my first studio session till probably, you know, a year in, like 2021 maybe. And that was, you know, with masks and social distancing and, you know, the whole thing. So that, you know, when the pandemic first hit, it was just like, you know, a brick wall. Everything just ground to a halt. And those of us that could were scrambling for unemployment. And I was lucky. I live in a small town north of New York City. I mean, I grew up in the city, but I've lived here since in this town since 2012. And I was able to, reach out to my representative and say, hey, listen, I'm having trouble getting this unemployment. And he kind of helped facilitate that. So those of us that could, which I think most musicians were able to do it, but it was jumping through hoops. You got unemployment. So I had unemployment for, 2 years. And then you just kind of hunker down and hopefully you're not saddled with debt. And hopefully you've set up a mode of living that doesn't require you having to go out all the time or having to, which I don't. I'm a musician. So when I'm home anyway. And, the studio stuff, it would have been nice for more of that to happen, but I don't have a home studio at the moment. I'm actually in the process of setting that up. But you just had to kind of bide your time.
Yeah, I understand. But do you have family and kids and so on?
Yeah, I mean, they're grown up now.
Okay.
So I didn't have that nightmare of, school and play dates and, the whole thing. So
which year were you born exactly?
65.
65, yeah, we're the same age. I was born 64, so yeah, okay. That's nice. I have a kid who's just 13, so I was a bit late when it came to that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Okay, but now I guess you're back in business fully. I mean, working or with touring or what?
Yes, at the start of the pandemic, actually, I was working with an artist, the German singer Nena.
Yeah.
And I've been touring with her for a few years. But at the same time, I got an offer to work, because I work with lots of artists. I got an offer to work with the Psychedelic Furs. And they had just finished a new album in 2020. And it was just about to come out when the pandemic hit. So I was in talks with them. We were discussing logistics for starting rehearsal and touring. And then all of a sudden, everything shut down. And the timing was such that I hadn't even announced it yet. We were literally getting ready to do this. And so when the pandemic hit, I thought, well, there's no point in announcing it because who knows what's going to happen. Even without a pandemic in this business, you don't say anything until it's already, when the rubber hits the road, that's when you announce it. And so for 2 years, basically, I sat on the fact that I was the new drummer for the Psychedelic Furs. And then finally, in 2021, after two cancellations of whole rounds of touring, we finally were able to get up and running. So now, yeah, things are going, and I'm getting ready to go back out on the road with them actually in about 10 days.
Oh, wonderful. Are you coming to Europe, to Sweden?
We plan on coming. I don't know about Sweden. Gosh, I wish. We plan on hitting Europe in September.
Okay, cool. That's nice. Okay, so tell me then, how did it come about that you came to work with David Bowie? He's one of my big musical heroes. That's why I'm extra curious, of course, about that. How did that happen?
Again, it was just a very, very unique kind of situation. His drummer is Sterling Campbell, or was Sterling Campbell. And Sterling got the gig right around 91, I think. And Sterling had been in Duran Duran before that. Sterling was a junior high school friend of mine. And we came up together, drumming together, playing on the scene together. And he was kind of the first one of us to launch, and that was in '86 with Cyndi Lauper. Anyway,
Uh-huh.
he eventually made it.
Duran, I just must tell you, I remember Duran Duran from the scenes in London in the early 80s. I was in London a lot at that time. I was a teenager and, night clubbing in London. And I remember them from that time very well.
Cool. That's so cool.
Okay, please go on. Please go on.
And so Duran Duran, I think, there's a connection with Nile Rodgers.
Yeah.
And so Sterling had connected to Nile Rodgers. And when David Bowie did the Black Tie White Noise record, he decided to collaborate with Nile Rodgers again. And that's when Sterling came into the picture. And David took such a liking to Sterling that Sterling became his drummer. And funnily enough, Sterling lived in a building with Dennis Davis, who was Bowie's former drummer for the whole Berlin era and, Scary Monsters and Station to Station, all of these like phenomenal Bowie records.
Yeah.
The drummer lived in Sterling's building. So,
just by coincidence,
he took me to his house once. So, I got to meet Dennis a couple times.
Yeah. Wow.
But anyway, so David took a liking to Sterling, and I think he felt also that there was some kind of lineage, some kind of connection, because David's loved New York drummers, right? He's had Dennis Davis, he's had Omar Hakim, he's had Poogie Bell, he's had Sterling, he's had me. So he definitely is comfortable with New York drummers, Mark Juliana. So what happened was Sterling had done the Outside album with David. And right after the recording of that, David decided to take time off. And so for guys like us, who are not independently wealthy, that's a precarious time. And it turned, from 6 months into a year, and from 1 year into 2 years. And Sterling had to do something. And he got an offer to join a band called Soul Asylum as a member. So he's not just a hired gun now. He's going to be a band member. So he accepted. And right after that, David called him and said, okay, I'm ready to do the Outside tour. And Sterling was like, I can't do it. I just signed a contract, with Soul Asylum. And so David said, darn it. I need a drummer. Who can you recommend? And Sterling said, use my friend Zack. And so I had a shoe in, and I just came right in.
Had you met David before that?
No, I'd never met David, but I'd already toured the world with Bruce Springsteen. So that was pretty high level touring. And before that, toured the world with the B-52s. So I had experience.
Yeah.
And aside from that, Sterling and I growing up together, he knew my ability, and he just thought, this is, he told David, don't worry about it, call Zack. And so that
so
was
how does that work? I mean, David calls you and he says, let us try one evening, or how does it work? Does he test you before he decides, or did he just say, go for it?
In this case, not. In this case, as I said, he just said to Sterling, I need someone who can do this. I don't want to go through an audition process, because David's not very patient. He likes to just, hit the ground running. And Sterling said, don't worry about it. So there was no audition. He didn't hear any other drummers. Luckily, he had no one else in mind, because he actually had Gail Dorsey in mind, because he had seen Gail on TV from when she lived in London in the 80s. And she had toured with Tears for Fears and Gang of Four, and so she had experience also. And he requested her directly, but he thought Sterling was going to be the drummer, so that was all set in his mind. And when he found out, he was kind of caught off guard and just said, okay, well, I need a drummer. Who can I use? And so that's how I got in there. And no, there was no audition. I just started rehearsing with the band prior to David showing up. we learned the material, and then David came in, and we just went from there.
And that was, she was with you, and was it Mike Garson as well?
Yep, that was Mike Garson came back for actually Mike Garson is on Black Tie White Noise as well, I think on one song. And then he did the Outside record.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mike Garson was back.
Why did David take 2 years off before this happened? Do you
I think he
ever
wanted
know?
to paint.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Because this is so interesting, because I met David briefly once in Stockholm, and that must have been 1995. He was doing a television appearance. Were you with him, possibly?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we met.
Could be.
It was a TV studio in Stockholm, in the national television, and you did like 2 songs in a program. Do you remember?
Oh yes, if the band performed, yeah, then I was definitely there.
Okay, great.
I don't remember it though. Sorry.
No, I can understand. So okay, tell me how was it to rehearse and work with David, if you compare it with other major artists that you worked with, like Bruce Springsteen and so on? Was it different in any way? I mean, personality wise?
Well, it was like a dream. I mean, as I say, at that point, I had just been on this upward trajectory of going from being, a New York musician to suddenly being an international, basically a rock star almost overnight. It felt like, I mean, it was gradual, but it was a pretty steep incline to go from, 89 with the Bees to 92 with Bruce, and then 95 David. So it was just this upward trajectory. And he was different in that, well, he was David. So there are very few people you can compare to him. He's in that upper echelon of rarefied musicians. So there's that, but he was different also in that he kind of encapsulated everything. He was not only charismatic, but he was also kind. He was not only a rock star, but he was also this conceptual artist. He was super well read. He was an actor. He was just all of these things rolled into one. So it was like everything had led me to this, to be ready to be in the presence of such greatness. And he was not a micromanager. So working with him was really easy. He pretty much just let you do whatever you wanted. And he was not your typical rock star in that, he had to have everything, he wasn't a perfectionist, and he wasn't thinking about the music in a conventional way. He was thinking about it in a much more kind of conceptual way and a more abstract way. So he didn't get hung up on little details like, you got to play it this way, or you have to sound like, I mean, he wanted things to sound a certain way, but he just gave you an idea. And then he wanted to sit back and see what you would do with it. And he was pretty much happy even with whatever came of it, because he didn't really have a preconceived notion per se. He was always experimenting. So if something came out a certain way, he was like, okay, cool. That's the way that came out. So wow. It's really easy to work with, a lot of fun, always telling jokes, liked. And also he was at a point in his career where, again, it's not like you're going out with some artist who's just doing their first album or their fourth album or their fifth album. This is a guy who's done, dozens of albums, and he's been through it all. He was past his drug phase. So he was, not, there were no drugs at all on those tours. We were simply getting high on the music and the excitement and the thrill of being able to tour the world, as you would with David Bowie.
Had he met Iman at that time, or?
Yeah, yeah. He met Iman in like 90 or 91, I think. So,
Uh-huh.
so yeah.
So he had a stable family life. He seemed to be very happy with her, as far as I can tell, just
Yeah,
reading the papers.
yeah.
So was she on the tour with you sometimes?
Sometimes she didn't really hang around that much. She came to, I remember her being in Spain. I remember her a few times. Actually, my first child was born right at that time. And
Uh-huh.
I remember her looking at my baby longingly and looking at David, like, little jab of the
Wow.
elbow.
Wow. Okay, so they hadn't had their daughter at that time.
No, no.
No. So you know her, their daughter?
I met her when she was an infant.
Mm, okay, I see.
Yeah, they
Yeah, I
were
just
recording
seen.
Heathen the year she was born. And I'm not on that record, but I did come to the studio to hang out. They had a barbecue one day up on the mountain here in the Woodstock area. And um, Alex was 2 years old. So that's when I met her. So not an infant, a toddler, I guess. In fact, that was the day she learned to walk. I
Oh,
remember
wow.
Coco saying, of course, she picks this day to learn to take her first steps.
Also, Coco Schwab was with them at that time.
Yeah, yeah, no, Coco's always been there. The only time Coco has ever not been with David, I think, was on the Earthling tour because she had
Mhm.
an illness. So she had to take time off. And we pretty much did that whole tour without Coco.
Mhm. I see. Yeah, it's so fascinating because as I sent you over the email, this is the drawing. Do
Wow.
you recognize yourself?
I do recognize myself. Yeah.
And you didn't know this existed.
No, no,
It's
no. As I said, I told your colleague I have one that
yeah,
David gave to me, but I didn't know that there were multiples.
because this is from June 97. Yeah, I don't know
Hmm.
if you can see that, but Bowie signed
Yeah.
it on the back, and it's from his art studio in London. But you have a picture, but not of you, as I understood it.
No, yeah, it's exactly like that. It's just different.
Okay, so it is a portrait of you
Yeah,
that you have. Okay, okay, that's cool, but different. Okay, so obviously he made two versions of you.
yeah, yeah.
uh, because this one I know is in the Moon Age Daydream documentary. It's
Is
shown there.
it?
Yes,
Ah, oh, I haven't seen it yet. Okay.
you must see it. It's actually very good.
Well, that's what everybody says.
Okay, so anyway, so you toured with David, was it twice or three times?
Uh,
International tours.
Twice the outside tour and
Yeah.
then the Earthling tour. I mean, there was a kind of little tour in between, but I consider it where we went to Japan,
Mhm.
but I consider it just part of the same two tours, really.
Yeah. And how was it to work with David on tour? I mean, was he very what you call it, disciplined? I mean, you do your show and then you go to bed and to travel next day, or I mean, or was he relaxed about it, or how was it?
Well, as I say, this is a guy who's done it. So
Mm,
so he's pretty much done it every way you could, and he's been through all of his different phases. Um, people, you hear them talk about how he assumed characters when he was Ziggy and when he was the Thin White Duke and he was all these things. And when you hear him talk about it, he says that they were characters. So that's why he was able to not get caught up in his own, BS the way a lot of artists do. They actually believe that they're the thing that they're portraying.
yeah.
And in some cases, they really are. I mean, if you say take an example like Hendrix, Hendrix was Hendrix,
Mm.
but David kind of always stepped out of that role when he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't on stage and was just David. And so he was very relaxed on the road, very easy, no drama. Like, I've been lucky to never be on a tour where there was drama, and I would not be able to stand that. And anybody who thinks that drama is always a part of it, they're wrong. It's not.
Mm.
So touring with David was always a pleasure, always fun. I mean, and we would be in Spain playing, say, a festival, because we did a festival tour, which again I consider as part of the Earthling tour.
Mm.
And outside, I guess we did two. Anyway, and then after the show, Julian Schnabel will be like, everybody come to my house. So we go to his house in Spain, and, his partner is making, pasta at 3 a.m, and we're just hanging out. And, there's a lot of stuff like that happened. In England, for the Phoenix Festival, he had a friend who had a castle. So we stayed we had lunch in a castle. I mean, we did stay in a castle, but that was not the same castle. So, it was like a dream, like I say. I mean, and so much so, and so surreal that I had literally thought, okay, this is my life now. And I couldn't know that would be the last tour I ever did with David. And from then on, I'd have to, kind of like, okay, got to hustle again, got to find work, But luckily, having worked with him is one of the best calling cards you could ever ask for. So it didn't make it too difficult. But the lesson, the moral of the story is, you never made it. You're always having to, keep looking for ways to stay busy and keep employed when you're in my field.
But the impression from outside, so to speak, for me is that David seems to be he was a very intellectual person with a lot of intellectual interests also outside of music. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And most of the artists I've worked with have been that way. The Bees, the B-52s, pretty much, when I met them, I kind of didn't know anything about anything. I mean, I had inklings of things. Or let's put it this way, they reignited a lot of the passions I had, passions in art, passions in, wanting to be aware of politics, wanting to be, wanting thirst for knowledge. Because the Bees are all very well, interesting, well-read, interesting people who have varying areas of expertise. Bruce Springsteen, he's a very deep thinker, a very worldly person. So when I met David, again, it was kind of like, okay, this is how it is. People at this level are way more than they appear. It wasn't until after working with David that I realized that's not true. A lot of artists don't know anything and have no other interests barely outside of their performing.
Yeah.
And, if they do, maybe they've read a few books, but they really are not like David, who's, it was just fascinating. When I toured with him, I was like, this guy could walk into any college and give a lecture, on either, world politics or, art history or, and it's not that he has necessarily degrees in these things. He's just been around so many people that are actually at high levels of politics or high levels of the art world or high levels of this and that he has firsthand knowledge.
Yeah.
And so he could literally give, a lecture in colleges across the world, and so it was fascinating to be with him because he was always looking for something new to be excited about. So, we would, we'd be talking about quantum physics on the tour. We'd be talking about, ancient Rome. We'd be talking about all these artists he was into, like Damien Hirst or Julian Schnabel or, Basquiat or Warhol or So we'd go to the museums, and then he'd have a friend who was a historian walk us through and talk about stuff.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so it was always really stimulating, fascinating. When I look at some of these bands and some of these documentaries, I just think, God, I'm so glad I didn't have to be on the road with one of these guys.
Yeah, but because I can hear that you are very interested in these things as well. I mean, that you seem to be a person who are interested in intellectual things, and it must have been wonderful to work with David in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I just thought this is how everybody is, And I remember being backstage on the Earthling tour. No, actually, it was the Outside tour, and we were touring with Nine Inch Nails in the beginning, and there was a drummer, very famous drummer, who was backstage with us, and I was kind of excited to meet him because I was a fan, and I walk up to him. He's talking to Trent, and I'm like, "Hey, how you doing?" I mean, he goes, he looks over at his girlfriend and goes, "Man, look at that! Can you believe that? Can you believe how hot she is?" And my jaw just dropped. I was like, "Whoa!"
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you got you dragging a club and a loincloth around, like where's your brain? Like, it was just, I was flabbergasted that not everybody is just pretending to be a rock moron. Some people really are rock morons.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I guess you heard, by the way, my podcast about quantum physics. That's the one I sent you, right?
Yes, that's why I did this. Actually, I was like, okay, this sounds like an interesting interview to do.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. So, but you're saying that David also was interested in things like quantum physics and science and philosophy.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And, also even like if you look at the Earthling album cover, there are photographs of objects, and these objects it's a type of photography that supposedly records their aura. So he was into he liked to kind of play around with mysticism and things that were not necessarily purely scientific as well, and kind of straddle that space between what we know and what we don't know. So these photographs were ones that I think Uri Geller had something to do with them. And it had to do with this is the object photographed by some kind of, I can't remember, some special camera. And here it is when you're touching it. So there's an energy coming from you that's going through the object, and it's being recorded by this camera. And yeah, I mean, he was just always into metaphysical things as well. But no, he was very much grounded in the scientific community and didn't really believe a lot of he wasn't a conspiracy theorist. Let's put it that way.
No. And not really a new age person, I think, or?
He wouldn't just dismiss everything. He would give it a fair shake, I don't think he ever fully decided on what he believed, 100%. He just took, and I'm exactly the same. I just cherry pick what I think is worthy, and you throw out the rest that is because pretty much everything falls flat at some point. I mean, even science. But that's the thing about science, is it never says it knows everything. It's
exactly.
It knows that it only that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, and so whereas 1,000 years ago you would explain things by saying God was angry. Now we know, well, no, that's just a weather pattern, or seismic activity is caused by shifts in the tectonic plates. So we have a lot more answers than we used to, but there's still way more mysteries that we don't understand.
Yeah,
and that's fine. To say that science can't answer it is a kind of non-statement. It just hasn't answered it yet.
So true, so true. And as the podcast on quantum physics shows, we still don't know the true nature of reality. Even, I mean, we don't
Right.
really know what quantum physics represents.
Right.
So, but when it comes to religion, did David have a specific stand there?
I don't think so, because whenever he was pressed on that issue, he always pointed towards Buddhism as the thing he felt the most comfortable with, but he wasn't a practicing Buddhist. There are also several photographs where you see him wearing a crucifix, and people like to say, oh, he's a Christian. I don't think he particularly was. You know, he was probably more into fashion than he was into Christianity.
Exactly. How come you stopped working with him? What did he? Did you get other engagements that?
Yeah, it was the exact same scenario that befell Sterling Campbell. When we were in Japan, I made the acquaintance of a very big legendary rock star there named Hote Tomoyasu, because he actually performed with us. His band opened the show at Budokan. And then he was invited to play on one song with David, All the Young Dudes. And he took notice of me and, said, I really want to work with you. And so the next year I did. I recorded in London with him. And then I did a tour of Japan with him in '98. And I said to David, is this okay? Like, do you have anything planned? And David was like, nope, at the moment, I wish I could hold you back, but I can't. So have fun. And then the next year in '99, the same thing. Nothing was happening in the David camp. And I said, Hote's asking me to come to Japan again for 3 months. Is that going to conflict with anything? And David said, no, I really can't say. No sooner did I arrive in Tokyo than Eileen calls me up and says, oh, VH1 Storytellers just asked if we could fill a slot. I think someone had canceled. So it wasn't even something David planned on. And David called and I just said, I can't. I just signed a contract for 3 months. I'm not the kind of person who goes back on a contract. And so Sterling came back in. And luckily, Hote used me for the next 4 years. So I was employed, but I didn't get to work with David until the next day. Literally not literally the next day, but the next day. Album.
Yeah, exactly. But and when was that? When was that?
2011.
Okay, so you came back to work with David 2011. Yeah, and then what happened? What happened after that? Did you tour with him at that time?
No, he never
he didn't tour
again. Not after.
No, that's right.
2004. And
yeah, because he had a heart.
He joked about it. Yeah, something happened in 2004. Again, I was. Where was I in 2004? I was in between. I had just done my last tour with Hote for that period. And I was about to work with Gwen Stefani. But I wasn't with David at that time. So when we were doing the next day, there were a couple of songs when David would say, oh, this will be great live. And we'd all look at each other like, is he going to tour again? Yeah, it's going to happen. But he never did.
No. I mean, as I understand it, he was living quite a family life at that time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But did you keep in contact with him? I mean, after you did that album, were you in contact until he died?
Up and almost. I actually was in contact with him up until he was doing the demos for Black Star. But at that point, he had discovered a new group of musicians, and his fancy switched as it does, and he decided to use a new group of musicians.
Yeah.
That he met through Maria Schneider. So, Schneider. And so the contact, pretty much he was in contact with no one at this time, because I think his illness was pretty advanced at this point.
And
he
did you know he was ill?
shut down. No, I had no idea.
So it came to as a shock for you, probably, as it did for us, as the rest of us.
Yeah, the shock was seeing the Black Star video. When I saw that, I couldn't believe how much he changed from 2014, when we had done some of the first demos for the album, or what would become the album. And, you know, I mean, he didn't look amazing, but the difference between that and how he looked in the Black Star video was shocking to me.
Yeah, I certainly can understand that. Finally, what is the how to say this, the greatest musical memory you have from working with David? I mean, if you would choose one song or one live performance or something, which is your greatest memory?
Oh, that's a hard one. They might change from day to day.
Yeah, of course.
I think one that comes to mind, though, is playing The Last Thing You Should Do at his birthday concert with Robert Smith of The Cure. And only because, not because it's my favorite song he ever wrote or anything like that, but because that was a song where we had done a lot of manipulation of the samples for the drum track. And so it was going to be a challenge to perform live. And we only did it, I mean, that's my only memory of ever even playing that song. I don't think we ever played it before or since. And I didn't know what to do. And I decided to take a kind of little drum solo in the middle of it. And it came out okay. So that was, to me, that was a great moment, because it was totally spontaneous. It was his birthday. It was with a fantastic singer, Robert Smith, and I didn't fall on my face. But I mean, all those moments with David are just fantastic. There's so many, you know, playing so many of the songs I dreamt of playing with him since I was, you know, in junior high school. Getting to work with Carlos Alomar, getting to work with Mike Garson.
He's great.
Yeah, I mean, there were just so many great moments.
Okay, thank you so much for this. I think we should stop here. Zack, it was great to have you on my podcast. Wonderful to chat with you, and we'll keep in contact. I'll send you an email with links and everything.
Oh, please do. Absolutely. Look forward to seeing you.
And if you come to Stockholm, you have to send me an email so we can say hi in real life.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.